ni yetu lakini shamba ni ya serikali, kwa sababu already VOJ. This is why I normally encourage people to read and get facts before they ask questions.
Okay. We do
already NLC,
as a responsibility.
Yeah, NLC is already actually asking compensation, I mean refund of money in other conversations they have done before, and they discovered the land was actually, the facts they had were wrong. So the question is, the Ministry of Tourism, for example, in respect of that compensation, they are now reversing on Mombasa Road involving some hotel. The Ministry of Tourism is not being involved, or the then Minister for Tourism is not said to have sold public land. So these are the facts. So
it's merely politics is what you read about what has been asked.
Kwa sababu you see, what also amazes me, and I'm happy about it, hakuna kitu. I served in public for 10 years. There's nothing to pin me down on. Lazima sasa watu wapike vitu, unajua
Thank you. Fair enough. Uko na labda strategy gani kuhusiana na masuala ya devolution?
You see, devolution, you don't need a strategy. What you need to do is obey the law, and do the right thing, and act responsibly in terms of administration. You see, if we stop the wastage of public resources, because the question for devolution is whether or not to support the growth, existence, institutionalization, and strengthening of devolution. We have accepted this as a way of life, and I think it's one of the best decisions we took as a country. Okay, there are challenges, to be honest with you, because I think, did we create too many counties? In my view, I think the structure, administrative and government structure of the constitution we created may be heavier than our economic capability. That's debate for another day. But as it is now, the best is to try and work very hard through the existing infrastructure to strengthen devolution, work very closely with the county governments. I remember when we had the challenge of COVID in 2020, 2021, had we not worked very closely with the county governments, we would not have succeeded. The president then had very regular meetings with governors, and we always interfaced with them very closely, on the things that they do. And then there's work that we were doing, because I remember on the side of government, I was the one who was chairing the meetings, and on the side of the governors, it was Governor Oparanya, who was the chair of the Council of Governors. We had started a program of looking at, for example, any barriers to investment and trade within the country as a result of so many levies and so many business decisions that are made by counties. How we reduce the permits, how we reduce the levies in the counties to facilitate growth, investment, and so on.
Ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business. So, in my view, the best way to support devolution in the country is to ensure that we stay on that trajectory of constantly looking at how we harmonize that interface between national and county governments. And this should be done almost universally at all levels, whether it is on statutory actions, whether it's on the question of trade, whether it's a question of administration, even security, because you see in some areas, the county has got the enforcement officers, then you have police officers, then you have administrators. Sometimes they overlap and mandates cause unnecessary tensions and stuff like that. There was a law that was enacted by Parliament that is supposed to give county governments authority over a measure of local security management. That needs to be looked at, so that, for example, in the case of what we witnessed this week on the goons in Kisumu and in Siaya, probably a better interface of that and constant training. At some point, we were even mooting the idea of harmonized training in the security sector between the enforcement teams in the county level and the national level people. So this is what I think ndio itasaidia kwa kisa, because you see, what do Kenyans want? Wanataka amani, wafanye biashara. They want a good business environment where, the licensing regime does not impede business. If you are moving goods from Nairobi to Kisumu, you are passing through 3 or 4 counties. You can't pay levies at every county and so on. Those are the kind of things. So constant engagement, constant working is critical. And 2, if we reduce the level of wastage, for example, in the national government, of course, more resources will be available so that you can move more resources to county governments. So the county governments can be able to deliver on the mandates they have and on the services that they can give.
Kuna shida ya debt. Madeni mengi sana. Wakati wa uhuru kutangia mwaka wa 2013 to 2022, 8.9 trillion. Now we are at 12.9 trillion comparatively.
You know, as long as we mismanage the economy and mismanage the country.
And in fact, people would argue that you served in an administration that developed an appetite for borrowing. The late President Mwai Kibaki left it at 1.9 trillion. Your boss then left the country with a whooping 8.9 trillion.
VOJ, you cannot develop and build huge infrastructure and increase of hasten the growth of your economy if you don't borrow. To start with from that point. But the borrowing, we have to go through this very carefully so that you know, wale ambao wananisikiza wananielewa vizuri. Kukopa sio shida. Ni wapi unatoa mkopo na ni nini unafanyia mkopo? That are the two questions you need to answer. Na kama hilo ambalo unalifanyia mkopo inaleta matumaini ama manufaa kwa nchi. Ukikopa pesa ujenge for example SGR kutoka Mombasa mpaka Nairobi, and you can see the economic benefit of doing that. Ama ukikopa you open up infrastructure in a spectacular manner to spur growth, hakuna shida kwa pande hiyo. Shida ni kukopa na watu wakirudi baadaye wanajiuliza huu mkopo ulienda wapi na umefanyiwa nini, the process. So what would I do in my view? First of all, I think we should make better use of what we borrow. Tuanzie hapo. Shida tulionayo ni kwamba niseme tu kweli, and part of this is not 100% the responsibility of this government. Is the way we have run government most of the time, and now we need to part from that way of doing things. Before we seek facilities, it must be very clear what we want to use those facilities for. We had started a process, which I would do if I was president, namely cleaning up our debt portfolio. You know, sometimes kuna kona zingine za government, kuna kuweko madeni ama facilities which were negotiated by entities of government without involving the national government. But it goes into our debt book. You know, a parastatal, for example, negotiates a facility like now. Before we came to government, one of the parastatals, one of the big parastatals in the country had negotiated some extremely unreasonable facility that continues to accrue incredible interest and so on and so forth. And the fact that it was led to pass and the signatures were appended by senior government officers is the responsibility of government that you would remove when you are a good manager. So it's a question of being tight in terms of how you manage, you know, borrowing and so on, how you manage utilization of public resources. Thirdly, it's also ensuring that the funds go to what they're intended for. Because you see, sometimes you ask yourself the question, those 4 trillions that we have borrowed in the last 4 years, imeenda wapi in the process? Imefanya nini? Iko wapi? Where can you see it? Because tunajenga nyumba under this housing arrangement, ni pesa tunachukua kutoka kwa wananchi through taxation and so on. Where is that 4 trillion? Ilienda wapi? Because you see, unaweza kusema you have expressway, Mheshimiwa Uhuru alikopa kujenga expressway, unaiona. Alikopa kujenga SGR, unaiona. Alikopa kufanya zile vitu ambazo tumefanya, madamu, Thiba damu, Kirinyaga na hizi zote ziko huku, unaziona zote. Sasa, you know, hizi zingine ziko wapi? It's a question of managing, you know, what we borrow for.
Kukopa si shida.
Kukopa si shida.
Shida ni kutumia.
Shida ni kutumia na vile tunatumia mkopo. Na pia shida ni tunakopa kutoka wapi. Tukikopa madeni ambayo yako na interest ya hali ya juu kutoka kwa private sector badala ya kwenda kwa multilaterals, tuende kwa World Bank where we get concessional loans. Unaweza kupata, tuseme kwa Kiswahili I don't know how you call it, but nasema ni madeni ambayo ni rahisi kulipa kuliko yale ya private sector. Hakuna haja ya kwenda kwa private sector badala ya kwenda kwa kama World Bank ama mashirika haya mengine ambayo yanaweza hata kutupunguzia kwa interest kulipa na tunakopa kwa muda mrefu ambayo inatusaidia. So hiyo ndio shida, lakini mwishowe ni kuambie shida yetu Kenya hakika sio pesa.
Okay.
Pesa tukimanage ushuru wetu vizuri na tumanage ile pesa zetu tunachukua vizuri, hatuwezi kuwa na shida. We can really do what we, you know.
Okay. Kuna njia mbili ambazo serikali inatumia kutafuta rasilimali. Moja ni mkopo ambayo umezungumzia, nyingine ni ushuru. How far should we stretch our tax base as a nation, and what would you do?
I think we are overtaxed. We are overtaxed, and when you look at the Kenyan workers, in most cases wafanyakazi wa Kenya wengi wako na payslip ndio, lakini tuseme tu kweli watu wanaumia. Mtu akikuonyesha payslip yake unashangaa how they make, how they will make ends meet in a process. So I think we can't tax our way to development and prosperity.
Okay.
That's why I keep saying either we deal more with concessional borrowing, better management of the resources that we can get, because concessional resources and funds are all over, and then we also make very good and responsible use of the PPP arrangement. Okay. I'm underlining the word responsible because that has also become an avenue of incredible corruption and then looting of public resources. And by the way, there are some of these...
Because there was also a question of the expressway under the PP program and even other programs during your tenure then in the previous administration. But you were not loud about them.
The people who raise questions about that PPP, by the way, have never demonstrated to me or convinced me what the problem is with the PPP. Because also, if you're Jay, we can't wake up in the morning and say there's a problem here, there's a problem, there's a problem. We can't demonstrate. They have never convinced me. What is the problem? The problem is they were not involved in the PPP, or they think it was skewed against us. What
they cite is non-disclosure of critical government documents on PPP, maybe contracts. A case in point was the SGR. I remember your former boss was put to task at one point to lay bare, and we were promised to get that document, which we've never gotten up to date. Does that worry you as a presidential candidate?
VOJ, this is again, unfortunately, to be honest with you, I want to be very polite and say, before people ask questions or before people go to interviews, they need to do their homework very well.
I did my homework well, Mheshimiwa Matiang'I.
When Murkomen came to office as Minister for Transport, the first thing they did is they published the SGR contract and put it in the public domain. And at that particular time, everybody was asking the question, what is wrong with the contract? Because they actually promised they were going to refill it, and they refilled it. They said this is the SGR contract.
But the administration that you served in failed to put it to the public. Does that worry you when you look at the issue of accountability?
It doesn't
as a public officer.
It doesn't worry me because the contract was available all the time. There was nothing new. That is why it was very easy again when the new administration came to office. They immediately said this is the contract, and this was put out, and everybody was asking the question, what is the problem with the contract? And to this day, nobody has ever said what the problem with that contract was.
There was the issue of overpricing.
No, but nobody has even pointed out that overpricing. It has never been discussed by anybody anywhere. Because you see, the other issue is that, the things which sound, they are good politics, but good politics is not always factual or even sensible when you look at it. Because that question, in any case, let us grant you that credit and say you are right in what you are saying. There's a government in place which has a responsibility to publish those documents. And by the way, by law, government cannot hide documents, especially from Parliament. Because the government is accountable, the executive branch of government is accountable to Parliament, because Parliament are the representatives of the people. Any committee of the House, any departmental committee of the House, can actually go and demand to see or to have sight of a contract, and there's no problem with that. Frankly speaking, and the facts will bear me out on this matter, unfortunately, this is again that area where I have to be polite and say, I like a situation where when people come into a situation, they have looked at all the sides of what is supposed to be happening. It is very difficult in this day and age, let me tell you, Jay. it is not even difficult, almost impossible for you to actually hide a contract. How did Kenyans know about what was going on at JKIA and the concessioning that was going on there? It's very difficult. There's no government that can hide, because if you don't want to reveal the contract yourself, your counterpart will be bound by even international regulation and they will reveal it. So that issue of the SGR contract, it was revealed. And even when this administration came to power, the Minister for Transport, the first thing he did was to say he's putting out the contract open. Our government had never refused to put out the contract. When they were demanded of it by Parliament, they just owned up, because you cannot ignore Parliament as it is. So, as I said, there are things that are very good politics and correct politics. But correct politics and good politics is always not factual politics.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It is not good to ignore Parliament.
Yeah.
But during your tenure, a couple of times you were summoned by different House committees, and you didn't attend. Some of them you attended, some of them you didn't.
Again, another aspect of good politics.
I mean, it's a question of accountability. We have institutions which you are accountable as a leader. So when you are invited to a House committee to shed light on contraband sugar, the role of the ministry during COVID-19, the Roraka land scandal, it was ping pong. Sometimes you send your PS, you are unavailable, most times.
VOJ, again, this is a matter which I keep saying.
I'm asking on behalf of the public, because they sent me here to ask you this.
Yeah, again, this is a matter on which, in all honesty and fairness, facts say something totally different. The question is this: let's begin from what is very rudimentary and factual on this particular matter. There is one thing that will not save you as a cabinet minister: defying Parliament. Because even the president will not save you from defying Parliament. Because if Parliament fires you or Parliament sacks you, even the president cannot reinstate you or appoint you. And you cannot actually qualify for public office if Parliament sanctions you as a cabinet minister. So let me begin from that rudimentary and say this: there is no minister I know of, unless you have a problem, who will try to defy Parliament. Because if you defy Parliament, you know what is going to happen. And Parliament has got powers to sanction you. So that's fact number one. Number two, as I said, there are things that are good politics, but they cannot be supported by facts. The Hansard is there, the records are there, and everything is there. People who are either your political detractors or people who want to look for something negative to say about you will always find things to say. Oh, he did not come to Parliament. How is it that there is not a single committee of the House for the entire 10 years I served as a minister? I was not sanctioned by one committee of Parliament, one. So if what is being claimed is true, how is it that if you are saying that most times I did not appear in Parliament, how is it that I wasn't sanctioned by the Parliament? Yet the standing orders, by the way, provide that you can only fail to come there 3 times. If you fail to come there 3 times, the committee sanctions you. I was not sanctioned once by any committee of the House. Fact number 3. When you are serving as a cabinet minister, especially in a busy docket like that of Interior and Coordination of National Government, chances are that given the roles that you play at that particular time, within and without the country, because by tradition, the cabinet minister in charge of Interior is essentially like, quote unquote, the special envoy for security for the National Security Council, especially in the region. And there will be regional things that are happening at that time while you are serving as Minister for Interior. I remember, for example, vividly, one time when the Parliamentary Committee on Security wanted me in the House, and the President wanted me to join the Prime Minister of Ethiopia in a meeting they were having on a critical security matter in the region with the rest of the people, because the President could not travel. So at that time, you have to be NADIS, and you are required in Parliament. So what happens, and the records are there. You do a very respectful letter to the Speaker and explain your schedule, and they ask the Speaker either to allow you to send either your assistant minister at that time when we had assistant ministers, or the PS, or ask the committee to give you a different date. There isn't a single time I can remember for the entire 10 years I served as a cabinet, there isn't a single time when the Speaker of the House either wrote a rude letter to me or a sanction letter to me or disagreed with me. In all cases of that kind, the clerk wrote back and said, the committee has been advised to reschedule you for next week. Or,
so your absence was justifiable
or send the PS to come and appear. And if if I was a sanctioned minister for non-appearance in Parliament,
Okay.
a sanctioned minister is where the clerk has written and said, you failed 3 times and therefore the committee has taken this drastic action against you. I don't have that. So when people raise these matters all the time, again, unfortunately, and I have had interviews with reporters who ask this, and I tell them, please consult your facts before you raise the question. The politics will be there, but the facts will also be in a different direction. Look at the facts before you go to the politics. It's like this thing of court orders. When people say, oh, you didn't obey court orders, and I ask the question, which order? Court orders are not things you can dream about and wake up in the morning and say, oh, the court orders have got references. So give me a reference of a particular court order that I defied. Then when you look at that, you discover again, it is, people are looking for an opportunity to lynch you politically.
Okay.
And then in that particular case, there is nothing. I said it in another interview the other day, I think I was sued as a minister 11 or 13 times, I can't quite remember the number. For the entire 10 years I was a minister, I did not lose a single case as a minister. And ministers and government officers will be sued all the time.
Okay.
You are taking action, for example, when I took action on firearms, the small arms, the licensing of firearms, and saying the regime is completely messed up, it's riddled with corruption. I nullified the entire registration of firearms and said, let's do it afresh so that we can know who actually is selling firearms in the country, who is licensed to carry firearms, and whether or not we are following the law. I did not write a new law. I simply went to the act as it is, and I said, let us go down the act. The act requires that for you to be licensed to carry a gun, you must qualify this. Is everyone who is licensed to carry a gun in this country obedient to these particular provisions? The answer is no. We actually cancelled so many licenses. But you see, people will always resist, especially those who have been doing illegal activities. I reduced the people who are selling guns in this country by over 80% by that act alone, because many did not qualify. So what is their resort? They will go to court and they go and say, oh, the minister is being this. And I say, let us patiently follow the court. And the court initially ends up reading the law, reads the decision I've taken, and says the minister is right. 11 times the court said that the minister is right. So when people say you defied this, which one? So let us always be guided by fact and the truth, and look at how things are going.
No problem. Thank you so much for that clarification. We shall resume after a short break, Mheshimiwa. I know there's the thorny issue of deportation of Miguna, which happened during your tenure. And of course, we'll delve into the issue of your plan for the region. The region is known for blue economy, sugarcane farming. What plans do you have for the region?
I'm very happy to discuss anything you like me to discuss. I am a public person. I have to be fully 100% accountable. I am happy to answer any question you ask me to answer. Those I know, I will give you the answers. Those I don't know, I'll also be honest enough and tell you I don't know.
Maybe before we hang up the microphone, one thing that people seem to characterize you with is that Dr. Matiang'I is a bully, an authoritarian, a dictator.
The question is, when you
has anybody ever asked you about this?
Frankly, nobody asks me that. I hear somebody making this comment here or there, and the question is, I ask this question. I would say personally that I'm probably one of the most successful ministers in this country. I never wrote a new law in the things that I people never step back and answer this question. And this is why I keep saying all the time, let's inform ourselves before we go into debates on issue. I never wrote any new law. Even when actually we drove very radical changes in the education sector to clean up the education sector, we didn't even write any new law. We didn't go to Parliament to write a law and ask Parliament to amend this law, amend that law.
So we have adequate laws.
Implemented.
We have adequate laws.
Exactly.
But wrong people to implement them.
A lot of people are compromised. Because when you are compromised, there's nothing you can do. When you are not, you see, for example, if I was a compromised minister, I wouldn't clean up the small arms sector the way I did. And yet you see, those people, the people who sell bundukis, are people who they have money. They're well connected and so on. So to stand up to them and tell them, This is what the law says. For you to be licensed to sell guns in Kenya, so that, you know, a private citizen can apply for a pistol and get it, this is what you need to have. If you don't have it, goodbye. And I removed almost 80% of the people who are selling small guns.
So, Dr. Matiang'I is a stickler of the law.
I obey the law. That's all. I am all about the law. Nothing else. Mimi ni mtu wa sheria tu.
Asante sana. Asante sana Nyakwana Mugajwang. Tutaikatiza hapo kidogo. Angalau tupate taarifa ya habari ya saa 3 asubuhi. Wabro yudo weche manyene yo machuok kod Vincent Otieno studio mara Mogi FM Nairobi Kenya kwa Mugajwang. Kain gipenjo mora kawaduogo Dr. Matiang'I bro lero nito en gi paro mane e wach mar blue economy mano fisheries nitie wan gi minerals e gwenge mag Nyanza bende wan gi weche mag pur mar niang makelno sukari cotton kod mamoko en gi paro mane to penjo machielo kama bende ng'eni ji biro penjo ni to nyalo bedo ni en mana ng'ama idhiro project mar jatend piny machon Uhuru Kenyatta mago te biro ni bang' kinde manokende bed mana kete kama en Mogi FM kar chuny jaluo nyinga en VOJ.